Hi, I'm Funmi Fetto, and this is On Reflection, the beauty podcast with a global view on beauty. Today's episode is in association with Kate Somerville, the clinically inspired expert skincare that visibly transforms skin with minimal downtime. Later in the show, I'll be joined by the Rio-based writer Bianca Costes-Sales. She'll be discussing the impossible beauty standards faced by Brazilian women. But first, required reading. This is a section of the show where we discuss beauty news and features that have piqued our interest. Joining me for this is George Driver, the digital beauty editor from LUK. George, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. So our first story is from British Vogue, written by my colleague Hannah Coates, and it's called Health Signalling Has Replaced the Humble Brag as Our Biggest Insta Bugbear. I recall Alexia Ng, the CEO of Cult Beauty, talking to me about health signalling. Talk to me about why you chose this piece.
I chose this piece because, well, firstly, I think Hannah is a great writer, and I think we share a slightly cynical sensibility, which I love about her. And I feel like although it does talk to a very real social media trend at the moment, there is a slight humor about it. But I feel like we can all relate to that frustration at seeing, these posts or videos on Instagram that are talking about the latest health achievements, whether it's 10,000 steps or, making your own green juice or growing your own veg, and feeling a bit like, gosh, when is it going to be over? And I think although we're all guilty of doing these things to try and show other people how, I suppose, successful our health is, there's a sort of satisfaction in feeling a little above the trend, but also in totally rejecting it entirely.
That sounds so you, George. That is so you, and that is so Hannah. But, the funny thing is my initial reaction was also slight irritation and a kind of eye roll when you see this obsession with wellness skin and people carrying out all these so-called wholesome activities, cooking up a storm and painting and making candles or whatever it is they make. And then I kind of really thought about it, and I thought, actually, in many ways, it's a means of survival. When you listen to the news and you read the news, it really gives you such a clear picture of just how bleak the world is right now. And I was thinking to myself that, well, maybe for a lot of people, it's escapism. It's almost sort of shutting down what is going on outside in order just to live. But that said, there are times when you wonder how much of it is self-preservation and then how much of it is just being a narcissist.
Exactly. I totally agree. I think definitely there's great positivity to be taken from it, especially after the past year, and anybody doing kind of anything for themselves that makes them feel good, whether it's getting into running after a long time or any other form of self-care, is to be applauded. I just wonder about the display aspect of it. I'm always a little over suspicious of anybody that puts their achievements or self-care particularly so much on social media, because for me, an overuse of social media is the opposite of self-care. I can feel very pressurized by it, and I know a lot of people do, but that's probably me projecting my own issues. But I agree. I mean, I'm a massive hypocrite about this because, we're talking about people growing their own veg. After this year, people really appreciated outside space or the lack thereof. And I particularly enjoyed this year growing my own herbs, which is possibly the most middle class thing ever. But the feeling of being able to grow something during a year when it often felt that everything else was being backtracked or shut down or at worst dying was really satisfying, and it felt really nurturing. So I am a massive hypocrite when it comes to this. I just wonder about the social media aspect of it, and platforms like Strava. I'm all for using Strava as an application to track your running and your progress and to show kind of how well you're doing for your own personal reasons. But the aspect of it where it invites you to make friends with people I don't need my entire Facebook following from 2015 to know that I only ran 1.5K this morning. And I feel like this competitive aspect is actually the opposite of self-care.
You're so right. it's that constant need of affirmation from social media and from complete strangers that we're kind of still not getting over ourselves in that way. It's a constant thing where we're being sucked into this vortex of social media and thinking that's real life and wanting the affirmation of all these people and all these strangers, and we forget that actually it's not real. I mean, I do think that there is an element of health signaling that does feel necessary because of the pandemic. You know, everyone's terrified of mentioning that they have a cold or a cough for fear that people will think you've got COVID. It's interesting how, even though we're not really socializing very much, or well, not supposed to be anyway, there's still that fear of being stigmatized and being a sort of social pariah in some ways if anyone knows that you may have had COVID or you sound like you may have COVID. I think it's slightly frustrating now that you can't cough or say to someone, oh, I'm not feeling quite well, or I have a bit of the snivels, without people thinking, oh my goodness, have you got COVID? Whereas before it'll just be like, no, I've just got a cold, it's fine. So I think there's that element as well, which is why people are sort of desperate to show that, no, I'm really well. I promise you, I am really well, you know?
Oh, I totally agree. I think now we are not allowed to be unwell. You should basically go into confinement if you've got a cough, because although in any other year at this time of year particularly, it would be rife with coughs and colds. Right now, you can't show anyone that you're ill and you can't avoid the stigma. So I definitely agree. Like, there's this idea of maintaining a healthy outward appearance to anybody and everybody as long as you can. And if you do have a cough, then better stay inside for fear of people avoiding you. I think another aspect of it is control. I feel like after last year, everybody felt very out of control, totally legitimately. And I think health signaling is this part of this feeling of being in control of your own health, but having these numbers and stats and results and applications to digitally and statistically confirm your achievements and what you've been doing. It's no longer good enough to go for a run and just not care how far you went, because actually you wanted that mental and spiritual feeling of a boost or self-care. You want the numbers to show how far you went, to kind of confirm your progress, and you're in control of that. And I think that's where I sort of differ. You know, my boyfriend at the moment is very into kind of getting a bit healthier and wanting to lose weight. And we argue a lot about buying scales. And I'm very much against scales because I think particularly for women, they're a very unhelpful thing to have in the house. They can be very addictive. And the effect on my mental health and my mood for just going out, doing the run and trying, and the feeling of my self-esteem and how I feel about my own body after doing that is so great that I actually don't need scales to then possibly confirm that it's done nothing at all to my technical weight. Self-care to me and health is all about, not all about, but a lot about your mental health and your mental and spiritual mood. And to me, health signaling feels kind of very contradictory to that, to have these hard facts and numbers and social media images and videos to kind of confirm something that should be more about an overall feeling.
I agree with you. I think that it becomes quite detrimental to, like you say, it's almost counterproductive, isn't it? It's detrimental to the feeling you're trying to achieve in the first place. You talked about the whole thing with not wanting to get scales, and I thought that was quite interesting because I have that conversation with different women at different times, and some women swear by it and others don't. I definitely understand your reasoning. I don't have a pair of scales in the house, but I don't know whether that's a good whether that's a good or a bad thing. I guess it's a very subjective thing. But since we're talking about bodies and weight and diet, I thought that's actually a good segue into the story around Lizzo. Basically, she posted videos about not feeling very happy with her body, being insecure about her body. And then further to that, she's posted details of a detox program that she's going on in order to shed some weight. And social media have not liked this at all. I'd love to know what you think about it.
I think it's such an interesting one. And I read this story and I watched her Instagram videos and I listened to what she kind of said about her own content after clearly experiencing some backlash. And I feel in two minds about it still. I think on the one hand, my initial instinct is to be disappointed in her putting her such an extreme diet out on Instagram for a massive following to see. I feel like there is a responsibility there to such a wide age range of her followers. And there is this sort of initial instinct to feel that it is irresponsible. And how does it differ from other diets or extreme kind of diet pills or shakes that other celebrities have promoted and we've totally torn down for their health issues and irresponsible messaging? And I kind of felt like that initially, but then I kind of watched it further and I saw, you know, she had spoken to a nutritionist. It was a guided program. The shakes she was making, I think there's this word shake has a very bad reputation, mainly because of Weight Watchers and those old school powdered shakes. And actually hers were smoothies that she was blending herself to a recipe provided. And so I felt a bit more like, okay, there's actual ingredients going into here, because I think a massive trap of these, you know, shake and bar diets or detoxes is that what you're consuming isn't actually made of any real food whatsoever. So I was a bit more on board with that. And I think at least her honesty around it was great. But I feel like it's not a long-term realistic thing, diet or health change or lifestyle change, to advertise to people. And perhaps she was a little naive in the way she presented it without that context. But then moving forward again, watching her talk, she said, I felt very worried and very ashamed to put this out there on social media. And I think no one should ever feel ashamed for something that they're choosing to do with their own body. She's not telling anybody else to do it for themselves. As far as she was aware, she did it in an informed and responsible way. She knew the reasons why she wanted to do it. And I think it's very sad that she should feel ashamed of herself because she knew about the criticism that she would get. And I think mainly the angle being that she would receive criticism for being this icon of body positivity and supposedly wanting to do a very extreme diet. I think it's quite unfair that we've placed her as this hero and icon of body positivity and a representative for larger women, and therefore she is not allowed to make any mistakes or nuance or try anything, and she is at fault for things that we ourselves try and do. And we all do silly diets and shakes or vitamin waters, and other celebrities do it, and she's being as limited by her identity as a body positivity representative as if she was being told she should be thin. Why isn't she allowed to be healthier? Why isn't she allowed to want to lose weight? I just think these decisions are hers to make, but perhaps this wasn't the most responsible way to make it.
There's a lot of hypocrisy here, a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of judgment here. You know, there is so much pressure for people in the public eye not to be human. They're not supposed to feel like us. They're not supposed to have insecurities around their bodies or their features or their ability. And what Lizzo has shown is real. She's a big girl who's been given this role of body positivity, given this role as an icon for this movement that she herself has openly rejected. You know, right now she's going through quite a tough time with accepting her body. And I think that's normal. Yes, detoxing is never going to provide long-lasting results. We all know that. I mean, the whole diet industry, full stop, is a bit of a con anyway. We all know that it is not as complicated as they say. If you eat less and you move more, you will lose weight. It's fundamentally quite simple. But anyway, the industry likes to make money out of women feeling bad about themselves and being insecure about their bodies. And there we are. I think my thing is that Lizzo does not owe anyone her body. I find it amazing how women who claim to be feminists, who will champion a woman's right to have an abortion, but if she wants to lose weight, it's a problem. I think fundamentally, what a lot of people may not have explicitly said is they have an issue because this woman who we want to stay this size, this woman who is our body positivity icon, who's our fat icon, we want her to stay this size. The reality is that sometimes you might not like your body. Sometimes you're not happy with your body. But social media want people to be real, but they want people to be real on their terms. And that's what I have an issue with. I think the whole thing around Lizzo actually made me really, really cross because I just thought, well, who are these people who are judging her? Who are these people? Lizzo does not owe you her body. It is her body. Whether you agree with the way that she treats it or deals with it, you can have your opinions, but she does not owe you her body.
I totally agree. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I just think, I think that's partly the issue to do with social media as a whole, is this owing. I know, a few friends of mine who are influencers, not necessarily about their body, but about other things. I always say to them, how can you live in this version of your life where you have to apologize for everything you do as if you owe an explanation to anyone who chose to follow you on Instagram? That must be so exhausting, and you don't owe them that. And I think that's totally the case in this situation. I think also it's this concept of a larger concept of women are allowed to change their mind. Lizzo might have been happy in her body when you first followed her a year ago, and now she might want to lose a bit of weight, or she might want to just feel a bit healthier, or she might want to improve her skin through what she's eating. And she is allowed to make those decisions and change her mind and evolve as much as we would like ourselves to be accepted for what decisions or changes of decisions we make in our own lives. But like you said, we want people to be one thing. We want to box her in as this icon of body positivity, which, like you said, she has rejected that movement. She doesn't want to be body positive. She wants to be body normal. She doesn't want larger women or bigger girls to be representative of a body positivity movement. She wants it to be representative of normality. And I feel like we've pinned, or her followers who are angry with her have put her in this box, which is as hypocritical as if we were annoyed at someone being too thin. Lizzo shouldn't have to explain that she had been eating quite bad food because that's what she needed to get through lockdown, and now actually she's feeling in a better place, so she's ready to improve her health and work on that. That shouldn't be our right to expect that explanation, and she shouldn't have to give it to us. What I would say is I feel like she's fallen into a slight trap of this before and after culture, which I do think is quite rife on Instagram. And a lot of other examples are far more unhealthy, far more irresponsible, and far more damaging than Lizzo's. And I know hers was coming from a place of authentic and kind of innocence almost, and honesty. But I feel like that her posting images of her body before and after quite an extreme detox doesn't necessarily aid that conversation. But equally, I don't know what her views have been on that subject before. So she may have spoken out about how she loves before and after culture, and that's absolutely nothing to do with me.
I think one thing also to remember is that Lizzo works in the entertainment industry. She works in the entertainment business where thin has always served people well. And for people who are bigger, they are, for the most part, given a moment. And that moment may last a little while, but it's still, in comparison to their thinner counterparts, it's a moment. And at some point or another, I think they do feel and sometimes succumb to the pressure to be thin. I feel for her. I think it's hard. And I do really feel for her. I think the pressure is real. Maybe it's something that would have been easier for her just to do on the quiet, whatever she wants to do with her body, and just do that on the quiet, like Adele did, maybe. And maybe that's easier. But even then, someone like Adele, she still faced a lot of really mean comments because she had lost weight. It's a very, very strange thing. People had a lot of things to say. They had a lot of energy for Adele because she lost weight. It's almost like they were more comfortable with her being a bigger girl. That was more comfortable for them. And now that she's thinner, it's an issue. We are a messed up society, I think.
I totally agree. We want these women who we almost, we feel like we're allowing them to have their moment. Okay, well, you can be the one not size 8 celebrity of the year, and you can represent every woman that's ever been larger than a size 8, and you can take that burden on entirely on your own because we're allowing you that. But if you dare to lose weight like Adele, we're going to be very judgmental of your, motives or your methods for doing so, because you're not in what we decided we wanted you to be. I don't know if we're threatened by these women being so talented when they are a larger size, which we deem as something negative or not aspirational. So we prefer that they've got one thing, or that they've overcome this seeming challenge of their body shape, and we don't know how to deal with it when they then lose weight and are an accepted size or beauty standard that the industry actually wants. So therefore, they're talented and acceptable in a sample size dress, and we deem them as beautiful by traditional standards, and that's too much. Do these women have to have one thing? Is it that we can't accept that they can be more nuanced or have more facets to them? We want them to be what we want them to be.
I think what it does highlight on a grander scale is how pervasive this idea of beauty standards are, and the pressure that women feel to fit into these beauty standards. And we talk a lot about that on this podcast. And I think more and more, the more conversations that I have really highlights that it will take so much to completely dismantle the standards that women have to meet or feel they have to meet on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. I think it will take so much to completely eradicate that. Let's go on to our next story. This is a piece in Dazed about the Halo Code. This is a guide set up by a group of Black activists, which our schools and organizations and workplaces celebrate Black hairstyles rather than penalizing the students and employees for the texture of their hair. So Black hair texture has been used for a long time now as a vehicle for racism, but people don't seem to talk about it very much. Emma Dabiri created a documentary around the issue of hair discrimination. So to have this Halo Code, I know Unilever have signed up to this. Hopefully it will roll out into more schools and more organizations. I think it's an excellent thing. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I chose the story because I feel like it's such an important movement and step forward and very long overdue. But what really resonated with me was the aspect of the organization where they go into schools. So obviously, it is totally amazing that Unilever are on board with their major brands, hair brands, and I'm sure they will make incredible work on a mass scale. But I thought the organization's work in schools with younger people and educators is so important. And it reminded me of when I was at school, and I went to a grammar school that was predominantly white in a predominantly white area. And I recall my friend at the time, and he was mixed heritage, and he'd just got his hair braided. And I remember being with him when he got pulled to one side by the headmaster and basically sent home because of this hairstyle. And it's one of those moments that has always stayed with me because of how unjust it felt, how embarrassing and humiliating it must have been for him, as he must have been, I think, one of 3 non-white students in my year of 120. And this school dress code that had been, in theory, designed to be uniform and to make everybody included and the same, had actually done the opposite and had made him totally other. He was wearing a hairstyle that I could have been wearing. I could have been wearing, French braids that would have been the exact same style, but on Caucasian hair rather than on a male's Afro hair. And I would have been allowed to be at school. But because of his skin color, hair texture, and gender, he was sent home. And it's always sort of stuck with me. So I think the work they're doing to bring this Halo Code into schools is so important for younger students and children at a more formative age to really feel like they're not going to be growing up through an education system or going into a career or a profession where the way they wear their hair is even considered to be important to their achievements.
I completely agree with you. And I was having a conversation with someone this week actually around the importance of this type of education happening within the school system and, education system. Black hair, it's such a signifier of blackness, and it's yet another way in which we see racism manifesting itself, because essentially that's what it is. Hair discrimination is another form of racism. And people don't see it that way, but that's really what it is. One of my sons is 7, and already he's having children telling him that his afro is too big, his hair is too messy, his hair needs a haircut. He's 7 and already he's getting that. And he's understanding what that means. And we really have to think about that. We have to understand that when people say these things, you're saying that the way my hair grows out of my scalp does not align to Eurocentric ideals. And so it is unacceptable in its natural form. And this is a problem. I think that education is really, really needed. And it's needed in schools, but it's also needed in the workplace, because I do think that a lot of workplaces don't necessarily take this seriously because they don't really understand it. I remember not too long ago, I wore cornrows to an organization I was doing a lot of work at. And I had so many odd comments and so many remarks that I ended up actually feeling quite uncomfortable and so under the microscope that I just didn't feel like I belonged. I began to feel really uncomfortable. And I unraveled it within days. Normally when you have your cornrows in, you leave it in for a little while. I unraveled it within a couple of days. So I think that initiatives like the Halo Code are necessary. They're a necessary part of the conversation around discrimination. People don't seem to think hair really counts. But, with black hair, like I always say, black hair is very political. And I think it's important to understand everything that comes along with that and humanize the people who have black hair and understand the heritage and the culture and lots of other things around it, so that you don't inadvertently perhaps discriminate against them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if we're going to be doing these sort of inclusivity, diversity, race training at work, which I think is essential for every workplace and everyone should be doing, I think this is a key topic that should be included as well. What you were saying about feeling commented on or looked at, and it made you feel very uncomfortable just for the noticing and this sort of otherness. And I think for me, it sort of sparked this idea. I know it's not exactly the same, but when, you get heckled on the street and they say, I don't understand why you wouldn't want me to say that. It was a compliment. And you say, I don't want you to say anything at all. I don't want you to notice me. I didn't walk down the street for you. This was for me. I need to get somewhere. I didn't want there to be any sort of, message being sent out to you that you felt you needed to comment on. And I feel like there's a sort of similar thing here where you don't want your hair to necessarily in the workplace say anything. You don't want to be commented on or noticed. You want to be as noticed as anybody else. And I think as much as I say you don't want to be noticed, that doesn't mean there isn't education around it that needs to be done. My school, in that story that I said, the headmaster was a white man. I don't recall us having any black teachers whatsoever. So those dress codes would have been totally devised by a faculty who none of which had to even bear in mind how they applied to different types of hair. So I think having this code, I suppose it would be easy to say we shouldn't need this. We shouldn't need this code to help guide us. We should be educating ourselves. We should be seeking out this information, educating ourselves, and we should be doing the hard work. Unfortunately, and luckily for us, the fact is that this organisation has introduced it for us so we can do our end of the work to make sure that we're at least absorbing and reading and adhering to the information that they have so helpfully put together for us. Because if the information is there and it's being infiltrated into workplaces and schools, there's no excuse for it not being put into place, and there's no excuse for anybody to feel like their hair affects their career or education.
We've got another day story here that you chose, and I actually can't believe we're even talking about it. It's called "A Tampon String is Appearing on the Side of a Bus for the Very First Time." I mean, I think the real story is that such a fuss has been made about these ads and that a tampon string is deemed so controversial. And apparently, this wasn't even the first iteration. It was rejected quite a few times before this particular ad was settled on. Talk to me about your thoughts.
I mean, we're living in a mad world, aren't we? It's newsworthy when you advertise a product as it is. In what other situation would you put an ad up for a product where you couldn't see the product, or actually the product didn't really work like that, or actually the product wasn't actually that color? I think it is madness that we've put up a picture, not even a candid picture, of a tampon, and we're shooketh that we can see the string from the tampon. Well, if half the world didn't know that a tampon has a string, now they do, because I'm guessing it's the half that didn't have to put it up their vagina. How did they know how it comes back out again? I just think it's crazy town that there seems to be this obsession with desexualizing adverts for period products, which are inherently not sexual products. I understand that period products, by proxy, are to do with the crotch area of a person with a vagina, and therefore there is this implication of sex. But periods in themselves are a biological representation of the process of sex and having children. So why are we so horrified by something that is, in fact, the reason we are all here? And I know we've all said it before, that none of us could exist without women having periods, but why we're still in 2020 so shocked to see that you can use tampons to not bleed all over yourself. We're not even talking about contraception here. There's not even a moral or ethical issue of whether we're advertising a pro-choice or pro-life situation here, or whether we're talking about contraception depending on our religious views. It's a literal practical way of stemming the flow of blood once a month for half the population for the majority of your life. And it's the same as advertising a cloth, essentially. I just think it's bonkers town.
It completely is bonkers. I just thought, are we really here? Are we really still here? I mean, one of the things I found really interesting actually is that the piece also talks about an influencer who posted an image of herself with a tampon string hanging out of her underwear. And the vitriol she received was mainly from women. You know, we have this internalized misogyny situation going on here around the issue of periods and period products. We deem them as so terrifying. A lot of the comments were saying that she shouldn't let people know that she's on her period. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to go around, you know, telling everyone when you're menstruating. I mean, I'm laughing so much because it's just all so ridiculous. But I do think that, you know, we have to address the issue around why periods continue to be shrouded in shame. They're normal, they're part of life. We have to eradicate this stigma and the silence around it. I don't know, we just need to start talking about it and normalizing it. It's not dirty, it's not shameful, it's not sexual. You know, it really, really isn't. Like you said, it's biological and it's a normal part of how a woman's body works.
Exactly. And I just think we've all said it before, if men had periods, we would not be in the same place. And it's just insane. You know, that first advert that swapped the ambiguous blue liquid that possibly looks more like you'd about to pour it down a toilet than it would come out of you. You know, that advert that swapped that blue liquid for red liquid, which we can all assume still wasn't blood, was just a red hued liquid. That was in 2017. So it took that long to get that, and nearly 4 years later, and for some reason, the next, you know, groundbreaking move for advertising around period products is to show a period string coming out of a very lovely pair of pants, a totally covered up pair of pants, on what looks to be, you know, a very lovely, slim woman. We're not breaking boundaries here, really. If we're talking about inclusive body sizes, this is a very like traditionally acceptable body size, body type. Yes, she isn't white, which I think is great of Dame, because I think a lot of the time the period conversation feels very whitewashed by old school tampon and sanitary towel adverts. So I think that's amazing. But otherwise, it's quite a tame advert. She's holding the tampon. There's context to it. She's not, about to go out for a big night out with her tampon string hanging out. She's clearly at home and she's just used her tampon. And I just think it's mad we still feel like that's too much. And also this element of sort of the sexualization of it, but also the offense and the extension of that being kind of the unspoken implication is that putting it on a bus is inappropriate for certain eyes. Children shouldn't be seeing a tampon string. Well, half of those children will be having their own periods in not very long at all. Maybe they'll grow up seeing a tampon string, not just within their own home, but making it totally normal. And maybe they'll see an advert with red liquid rather than blue, and they'll actually be like, oh yeah, that's what happens to me. If these adverts aren't for the women who are having period or the people who are having periods, then who are they for? And I think that's so interesting when you say about how the people who are most offended by this are women. We have totally internalized this shame, and it's not our fault, because the only narrative we've been brought up around about periods is to be disgusted by them, to cover them up, to lie about them, to have euphemisms for them. Like you said, you don't have to go around screaming that you're menstruating, but how often do you say the word period rather than some sort of kinder or gentler nickname? How often do male partners or siblings inquire about your period or ask if they can get your products or check in with you about a process that happens to your body, where if it was the other way around and something happened to my partner once a month that affected them in various ways, or they just simply needed supplies for, I would probably check on the shopping list. Okay, do we have your sanitary towels? I think there is a responsibility to have this wider conversation that shows that periods should be spoken about by everyone, and they are not the sole responsibility of the people having them. And I think putting them on buses and things like that is surely only going to move that forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. We just need to talk about periods, period. I remember having a conversation with a female editor a few years ago, pitching this story about periods, and she visibly shuddered. I mean, she looked really terrified, and needless to say, the piece wasn't commissioned. But yeah, I mean, we need to stop being so terrified of periods. Now, let's go on to our fun story, and I've been looking forward to talking about this. Dolly Parton. I love Dolly Parton so much, and she is bringing out a new fragrance. I am generally not interested in celebrity fragrances in the least. I couldn't care less about them. Most of them are appalling, and I don't know why anyone would want to wear them. But this particular one gets me excited. Even if I never use it, I just want to have a piece of Dolly. You're a Dolly fan, aren't you?
I mean, who isn't a Dolly fan? What's not to love? She is just pure joy and amazingness, and Islands and Stream is my go-to karaoke song. It's always so interesting to see what stories kind of get the team's attention at work and what ones we're sort of slacking to each other. And a lot of the time they're very important, poignant kind of conversations or movements. And then this week it was Dolly Parton bringing out a perfume, and we were all so excited. I mean, the thought of what this perfume might smell like is just, I mean, who even knows? Can it smell like hairspray or sparkles or country music or joy? Like what possibilities are there? And I think the most exciting thing is that the company who are launching the fragrance with her, Edge Beauty, have said that it's going to be a multiplicity of olfactory forms, which I think is a very posh way of saying basically there's going to be an entire range of things to make your entire house and body and hair smell exactly like Dolly, which I'm fully in for.
I love the way that Dolly Parton is so over the top. You know, there's the lashes, the makeup, the boobs, the nails, and the big hair. You know, she says this whole thing about the higher the hair, the closer to God. And she always talks about how her wigs set her free. I mean, I just think she's incredible. I love the way that she is so open about the fake. You know, she owns the fake. She's really open about it. But there is so much more to her than just that. As she says, I might be artificial, but I'm real where it counts.
Oh, I love that. I mean, she's got this heartwarming kindness. And like you say, I'm not bothered about celebrity perfumes. I feel like there was the era of celebrity perfumes, and then they died with our entire generation of teenagers that were like, oh, they smell awful. I no longer care about that. But I do think that is just such a collector's item, and even just the anticipation of what it will be called. We all had a bit of a kind of conflab about what we'd like it to be called, and I think Jolene was the one that came out, although I think Jolene in England is also possibly a hair removal product. So
It is.
so I think
Yeah.
possibly not a great shout there for that one.
I think it should be called Blue Smoke because I love blue smoke.
Ooh, very moody, very moody. I don't know if
Yeah.
we should go with that moody for her first fragrance. I watched Steel Magnolias and she is fantastic in it. And I just love her as this salon owner, heartwarming friend. So maybe it will have notes of magnolia.
I don't know. I think it'll be something quite bonkers. I'm hoping it'll be something quite bonkers. Whatever it is, I think it'll be most welcome. And yes, I think it'll be a collector's piece. I'm so looking forward to it. And thank you so much, George. I've had so much fun with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had such a lovely time chatting with you.
It's now time for In Praise Of. This is a section of the show where we laud the merits of a single beauty product. This week, it's Kate Somerville's Exfoliate Intensive Treatment. Aside from the regular use of sunscreen all year round, there are two things that I can attribute to positively changing the look and feel of my skin: facials and exfoliating. A decent facial will rid you of dullness. It will unclog your pores, it will soften fine lines, and it will basically leave your skin looking a million times brighter. A decent exfoliator will keep up the good work in between appointments. But what if you could get a product that goes beyond the realms of a bog standard exfoliator and delivers the kind of transformative, fresh from the clinic results that you'd only expect to see after spending time in the hands of a skilled facialist? And what if it does this in 2 minutes flat? Well, this is what Kate Somerville's Exfoliate Intensive Treatment does. Yes, really. If you can't get to LA for an appointment with Kate, this is your next best thing. And even if you can, this magic in a tube, also known as Hollywood's 2-minute facial, is worth having in your skincare repertoire. The ingredients include enzymes from the 3 Ps. Well, I call it the 3 Ps. That's papaya, pineapple, and pumpkin. These are natural exfoliants which gently but powerfully slough off dead skin cells without overdrying the skin. It combines this with lactic acid, which is an amazing brightener, salicylic acid, which is excellent for preventing as well as treating breakouts. And then you have your skin smoothers, honey and vitamin E, you have your skin soothers, aloe vera, and you also have your free radical neutralizers, vitamin A and vitamin C. It's basically everything that you need for a safe, smooth, and soothing exfoliating experience in the comfort of your own home. I especially make this point about it being safe for a couple of reasons. First of all, when you put this on, it tingles. It doesn't burn, it tingles. That's absolutely fine. It's nothing to worry about. It's just doing its job. The second thing is, it has a granular texture. And this texture has had a little bit of a bad rap in recent years. People think of it as rough and harmful. And to be honest, a lot of them are. But please don't make the mistake of putting this in that category. It's really not. The exfoliate treatment is a dream to use. It's so finely milled, it's so sublimely made, and it's so expertly formulated, and it's really, really not coarse at all. So it does the job. It gets rid of dullness, it smooths skin, it cleans your pores, it gives you an instant glow, but it does it all without causing any damage to your skin. Also, one thing to keep in mind, this is a best-selling product, a cult product created by Kate Somerville. For those of you who don't know, Kate Somerville is one of the most famous and lauded skincare professionals on the planet. So unsurprisingly, this is nothing short of brilliant. But hey, don't take my word for it. Just try the product and then look at your skin 2 minutes later. The result will speak for itself. Now, talking points. My guest is Bianca Costa Salles, a Brazilian writer and translator based in Rio. Following a feature she wrote in Adama Media called Pretty Hurts, The Cult of Physical Beauty in Brazil, she joins me to discuss what she describes as a disturbing worshipping of beauty and its impossible standards. Bianca, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here, Funmi.
You're welcome. So tell me, for anyone who hasn't read the piece, could you just explain in a little bit more detail what the piece was about and what was the inspiration behind writing it?
Well, so the piece was really born when my editors asked me to share anything I thought was interesting about my experience having lived in Brazil and in London. And so I kept thinking about how me as a young woman, how I perceived that trajectory. And I came to the conclusion that it was definitely shaped by these ridiculously high expectations of beauty that women grow up with in Brazil, and how it was a very different conversation around that topic when I was in London going to high school and at university. So I really thought it would be interesting for international readers everywhere in the wide world of the internet to join in that conversation and learn different perspectives on that debate, which is so important nowadays to be thought of critically.
Well, we were having a conversation, weren't we, about this? And I recounted a story to you about a Brazilian assistant that I once had. He was probably at the time, she was probably around 20 or so. Yeah, I think she was about 20. And she'd already had her nose done. Her mother had gifted her a new bum for her 16th or 18th birthday. And she was telling me that she went to the Rio Carnival with her bandages still on her butt. And she, at that point, was also planning so many other procedures. You know, the rate of people, mostly women, having cosmetic surgery in Brazil is second only to America. Why do you think there is such an obsession with beauty perfection?
Well, I think it really has to do with Brazilian culture in the sense that there is the stereotype that Brazil gives birth to some of the most beautiful women in the world. And Brazilians tend to not only embrace that stereotype, but they take a real sense of pride in that, you know. And so it really becomes something that we've adopted as part of the identity of our nation. And as generations go by and time goes by, people tend to indoctrinate that into young women at a very young age in the form of compliments or unsolicited comments. And it's all generally seen as a way of helping Brazilian women to fit into that mold, as if that's something that would make them normal and more beautiful, or even as a kind of charity. Like you said, some people gift their daughters or their granddaughters cosmetic surgery that they know would help their loved one feel more accepted and more beautiful according to this standard. So it really has to do with the fact that Brazil sees itself and takes pride in seeing itself as the birthplace of all these beautiful women. So anyone who doesn't fit this incredibly artificial and unreachable standard of body types and skin perfection and hair texture would have to go to whatever lengths are seen as necessary to achieve that. And I can tell you that from my own experience, having a bit of a Roman aquiline nose, I've myself felt the need to have a nose job from as young as 14, if I'm not mistaken. And many of my friends have told me that they feel the same, whether it's about their nose or their lips or their bum, you name it. It's very common and it is encouraged. It's something that we see as very much something to be proud of and something to be aspired to.
So it's interesting that it starts at such a young age. And I just wondered, as a Brazilian, and you obviously you grew up with those ideals of beauty, which are so prevalent that surely they must have felt really normal. Was there any point at all where you felt, okay, I will definitely have to do this. Is there anything that you have had done yourself, if you don't mind me asking? And at what point did you start to think, actually, this isn't right, and I want to go against the grain?
I'm not entirely sure when it started, if I'm honest with you, because with these sort of things, it usually comes on so gradually and from such a young age that your memory gets very foggy. But I definitely remember that around the time when I was 14, 15, and I'm not sure our listeners are aware of this, but Brazil shares with its Latin American neighbors this tradition of quinceañeras, which are basically a massive birthday party that we throw to girls when they turn 15 to kind of symbolize and celebrate their debut into society. So it really happens as like a sociological phenomenon, if you will, that when you're in that age and when you're starting high school in Brazil, you start having all these girls getting worried about finding the perfect ball gown for their quinceañeras or getting invitations for their friends' quinceañeras. And then because it's kind of this symbolic rite of passage into almost young adulthood, when really it's still teenagehood that we're talking about, young women, young girls tend to be more obsessively focused about their appearance when they're going to be on full display for their friends at school, for their family members, when they're starting to be presented as young women as opposed to children anymore. You asked me if I had anything done myself. No, I haven't. But I do know that this is not an issue that is completely resolved within myself. It's something that in recent years, and I mean very recently, we've seen some movements of activism for the body positivity movement or even the body neutrality movements gaining ground on social media. And these kinds of influencers and activists have really helped me to think outside the box and criticize this standard that I felt so bad for not fitting into. So I haven't had anything done in terms of cosmetic procedures or plastic surgeries, but I can't tell you that it's easy for me to say right now, oh, I love my nose just as it is. I've made a decision not to have anything done to it because I'm trying to fight against this kind of instinct to put myself through whatever it takes to reach that standard of perfection. But it's definitely not easy having been brought up with all these ideas surrounding you and being very much drilled into your head from such a young age.
Do you feel that social media has made this even more pressurizing?
In all honesty, I feel like it has, but it has also helped fight against it simultaneously. So social media definitely creates this atmosphere where you're willingly putting yourself on display for other people. And it feels very much like an extension of those childish popularity contests that we'd see in high school environments, for instance. So to me, it very much feels like those unhealthy, toxic dynamics of a school setting are transferred onto this virtual world, and they can reach people of all ages, of all groups, and of all backgrounds. And it definitely perpetuates the cycle of comparing yourself to others, comparing yourself to this impossible standard of beauty and perfection that Brazil kind of unconsciously promotes. But on the other hand, I think simultaneously, social media has provided an important platform for people to think critically about why it is that we feel the need to conform to this standard. Why are we brought up to believe in it and aspire towards it from such a young age? So I feel like it has definitely facilitated criticism and problematization of these kinds of ideals. And it has also helped many influencers to be able to share their experiences with these kinds of ideas being put into their heads and putting pressure on them. So it has definitely helped some people to fight against it and gain more followers. And slowly but surely, I do feel like this is creating some kind of a change in the cultural attitudes in Brazil towards beauty standards. It's only very slow, and it's not reaching every generation yet.
You talked about this relentless quest for the perfect body in Brazil, and you made a comparison between that and the culture here. And you said when you came here, you felt a surprising sense of liberation. Why was that?
Yes, that was very much a shock for me as well, let me tell you. It was such a surprise to move to the London weather, which was basically the polar opposite of the Rio weather that I've been used to all my life. And instead of being bothered by it, I felt so free, having a legitimate excuse to cover up as much as I could in terms of protecting myself from the cold. And it kind of dawned on me that the reason for that sense of comfort and freedom was the fact that I wasn't on display as much and people wouldn't comment on my appearance as much. And at first, I attributed that to the clothes I was wearing. And I think I was only 16 at that time. But then over the years, I started to realize the more time I spent living in London and talking to my friends about these kinds of issues, that it wasn't just the fact that, oh, my body is more covered up, so I'm no longer a participant, an unwilling participant in this kind of social dynamic. It is also the kind of cultural tendency of Brazilian people to be so expressive and so warm that they will offer commentary on people's appearances, even strangers' appearances, all the time. Whereas in London, while you can't claim that there aren't any beauty standards being put on the spotlight and being pressured into young girls as well, it's definitely something that is far more discreet and far less harsh, at least, than what happens in Brazil. So part of the research that I did prior to writing that article led me to discover an interview where a British reporter interviewed some Brazilian women from Rio and asked them about these issues. And when this Brazilian woman from Rio asked him what the attitudes were like in the UK towards beauty standards and the idea of conforming to those standards through plastic surgery or interventions of that kind, the reporter said that in the UK, people usually keep quiet about those things. And the Brazilian woman responded that in Brazil, you have a sense of pride in saying that, oh, I finally got that nose job done. I finally fixed that imperfection that has been bothering me for so long. And the conclusions she came to, which I cited in the article, was that as a woman in Brazil, you feel an obligation to be beautiful. And I very much understood that. It's the idea that in Brazil, as a woman, everybody expects you to look your best and to have the best body type possible all the time. It's almost like a tax you have to pay in order to take up space in society in Brazil. Whereas living in London, you don't feel that pressure so overtly or so explicitly, even though it's still very much there, but it's a lot more subtle.
When I went to Rio, I did notice that. I noticed the body beautifuls. I noticed that that was quite a huge thing. The other thing that I noticed was the racial diversity. It blew my mind to see people as dark as me and then other people who were white, blue-eyed, blonde, and all of them, everybody calling themselves Brazilians. Of course, we know a lot of that came through the slave trade. And I wondered how the racial element plays out in Brazil, how it plays out in this quest for perfection. Are people with darker skin and different hair textures treated differently? And I say this because despite the racial mix, when people think of Brazil, they think about Giselle, the supermodel. They don't think about black skinned girls with 4C hair who really are just as Brazilian as she is. So I wanted to know how far the conversation around colorism has gone and whether people actually acknowledge that it's an issue.
The history of Brazil, its colonial past, are so complex, and the way they play into this conversation nowadays is a very intricate situation to kind of grapple with. For those who don't know, Brazil was one of the last countries in the world to abolish slavery. We only did it as late as 1888, whereas most other countries were abolishing slavery, or at the very least abolishing the slave trade in the first decades of the 19th century. So we're talking about decades of a gap there. And this definitely has very loud echoes nowadays, which can manifest in subtle ways, but also in very explicit and harmful ways. So what you said about Giselle is very much true. I feel like Giselle is that kind of paragon of beauty that ends up being a bit of a specter haunting every single Brazilian woman who feels an implicit pressure to try and be like Giselle, to try to represent Giselle as a Brazilian woman who is somewhat similar to her in beauty looks, in hairstyle. And as far as colorism goes, it's such a difficult issue to address because, like I said, social media has helped the conversation around beauty standards. It has helped people to criticize why those standards are in place and how they've been created and developed over the years. But it only has a limited reach. I feel like these conversations that take place in social media are only reaching the younger generations, millennials like myself, and Generation Z, whereas the real world outside of social media feels like an entirely different planet. When we try to have these conversations in real life situations, you can actually see people from the millennial and the Generation Z age groups trying to make a real effort to make sure everybody feels included and beautiful and accepted, no matter what their skin color is, their hair texture is, or their body type is. But then when people from older generations get into those situations in real life, they will often mock these efforts. Just as in the Northern Hemisphere, our younger generations who are trying to do this kind of activism for inclusivity are called snowflakes in a deriding manner. Over here in Brazil, we're actually called the generation of me, me, me. Me, me, me being like an onomatopoeia representing pointless bickery. So it's definitely not taken seriously in the real world, apart from the internet and social media. But I can see it making a real difference with the young generations. And if I were to venture a guess, I would say that in 20, 25 years from now, we will definitely see the fruits of that. There may well be a paradigm shift coming on in Brazilian attitudes to beauty. And I think we can actually see some beginnings of that process right now in the beauty industry, because in the past 5 years or so, it was so hard for my Black friends to find a foundation shade that matched darker skin tones. What would often happen is that they would have to buy 2 different foundation shades from national brands and mix them together to get something close to a match. Or they could make a choice to spend more money on imports and buy an international beauty makeup brand that would have a wider range of foundation shades. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen the major Brazilian makeup brands actually making efforts towards inclusivity and launching wider ranges of makeup products that could fit into everybody's skin tone. Because, as you've said, Brazil is incredibly diverse racially. We are profoundly miscegenated because of our history. And we can see that right now, these things are starting to change. These attitudes are starting to change, but it's very much at the beginning of a decades-long process.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Bianca, for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to having you back on again.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for this week. Please do visit us on orbpodcast.com for links to all the articles we've discussed. And if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter. My thanks to Joel Driver from Al, Bianca Costes-Sales, this week's brand partner Kate Somerville, and to you for listening to On Reflection. Happy New Year, everyone.